The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade.
That's
The Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
This morning a miracle happened as promised, the rising of the world's closest star. And the almanacs warned us that the fast coming weather might blow us away like dandelion flowers.
Welcome to The Marinade, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 141, and our guest is Willi Carlisle. Willi is a poet, actor, singer, songwriter, and manic expressive of the highest order. His infectious brand of folk storytelling continues to find larger and larger audiences, a phenomenon that requires only a listen to one of his incredible records or the witness of 2 minutes of his live performance to comprehend. We caught up with Willi after his set at the inaugural AVL Fest in Asheville, North Carolina. This was the last day of an outstanding festival, and I have to say a huge thanks to Wicked Weed Brewing and Worthwhile Sounds, who sponsored the festival, and Victory Lap Media for inviting us to cover AVL Fest. Willi and I found the quietest place we could, which was a brewery office that had been converted to a green room, so don't worry about adjusting your pod box if you hear the sweet sounds of Indigo D'Souza's set or folks breaking down things around us. I'm just so grateful for these opportunities, y'all. Willi is a really smart guy and someone whose life and work I am proud to uplift. Everyone, it is my great honor to bring you my conversation with Willi Carlisle.
I need a theory of all love, like the hearts of big tents. Gotta let everybody in. Doesn't matter who they are, if they do right or where they've been. Everybody gets in. My conclusion's not a great one. I'll leave that to the smarter ones. The soul is an idiot. It doesn't care why.
Check.
Whatever you do with it, the gifts are pretty simple.
That's all right?
Just
Okay.
Yeah.
tell you
That
what
volume right there is right.
Okay.
We're recording, we're rolling. Buddy, I think like, I didn't realize I needed like a good cry. And I was just like in a weird emotional place this afternoon before I got here. And I was standing there and you played that Steve Goodman
Oh, the Ballad of Penny Evans.
Yeah. I guess I should get my notes ready that I'm sure I'm going to throw out as soon as we just start chatting. But I just started crying, and I saw Danielle, who's the publicist for the festival, right after that, and her eyes were full of tears right after this. You finished the song, and then we kind of had a moment and we talked about it and how emotional that performance was. And then I walked away, and there were two buddies, two guys, and they were talking about how they had just been crying at your performance. So I just want to start by saying thank you. Like, I didn't realize I needed, like, it was stuck in there somewhere. Like
Sure.
A couple of months worth
Yeah.
of cry, I think. It's been a minute. And I don't know what it was about that performance, but it clearly wasn't just me.
Yeah.
Just incredible. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's an honor to do that. I need it. The reason that I do it is because I need it.
Yeah.
And when it has a good story like that song, well then that just makes it all the better, right? That's why we have stories, is because they abstract feelings that we can't touch, right?
Yeah.
Feelings that are white hot get to come out because of somebody else's story.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about that because, like, especially like the choice to do that particular song, because you have all of these incredible songs of your own. And when you're up there performing, I mean, you only had an hour for us today, and we talked about it off mic briefly, but that hour flew by. And it speaks to both, you as a performer and then also the songs, that hour was so fast and you left us wanting more. Just you. That was the other crazy. That's the wild thing about your performances. It's just you. Can you talk about the choices that you make up there and like what that looks like? How much goes into those choices?
There's some really basic showbiz stuff, right? Like festival sets are, you got to put banger after banger, or you're going to lose people's attention because there's a big atmosphere. They're sucked over to the beer tent or over to a hot dog or to one of their best friends, right? And I don't want to fight for attention, and I try not to organize sets that way. In fact, I want to guide people down in like an emotional trajectory that covers like a lot of territory, so that if you're with me, we go to a lot of different places. So instead of just saying, oh, this one's got to be upbeat and fun, oh, this next one's got to be upbeat and fun to hold on to people, instead it's like, well, this feels more powerful if we craft a narrative with it. So in terms of singing that old Steve Goodman ballad, Penny Evans, I haven't recorded it. It's on a record coming out next year. But I had to start singing it like after Roe v. Wade got overturned, because it's a song about a woman deciding to not have any more kids after her husband is killed in Vietnam. It's kind of like her personal act of protest, which is, of course, a big deal when the pill first comes around in the 70s, right? And is still a big deal now. So it's sort of like, if I'm going to hitch the center of my show to something, right? I'm not a person that can sit there and provide direct action. I don't get off the stage and collect signatures, but I still want it to have an ideological heart, and I want that ideological heart to be more like about human freedom than about any one political issue, and so I guess. That's why we pick it. That's why we sing it.
Well, I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad the set went the way that it did. There was I liked how you kind of broke it up too, because there was a period where you played Cheap Cocaine. You talked about that period of your life, and I'm curious about your evolution as an artist and a person, and I kind of want, as a jumping off point, and then maybe we'll go back into some of that more. Maybe get you to tell some salacious stories. But the thing I'm more interested in is, and I don't want to misquote you, but you said something to the effect of that about the sort of plural nature of the folk country revolution.
Yeah,
I think that's the word you used.
Yeah, pluralism.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I feel that moment, especially immersed in it the way that I am as someone commenting on it. Right. But then also throughout your set, you talked about like TikTok and and you made a joke about being replaced by Lil Nas X and Pro Tools. Where do you see yourself kind of in this revolution, and like how you're navigating it? Because so much of what you're doing is hearkening back to sort of some traditional roots of the music itself, but at the same time, there's such a progressive bent to the work that you do.
I believe in like a kind of, some of this is magic. I want to say that it's like faith. I believe in a kind of bio-regional rootedness that music can speak to, and also like an epigenetic rootedness. Not to say that like, oh, I like cumbia because I'm from this part of the world or something like that because it's in my blood. Yeah. Not that nearly. That's sort of, instead the opposite is like this music appeals to me because I choose it, because I'm free and I choose it, right? And that leading to all kinds of other rootedness, all kinds of other communities, all kinds of social interactions with those communities that are based around musical affinity groups. All that's kind of heady, and really I guess I'll use a practical example, is that when I got to Arkansas, people still had learned music from their grandparents. And those grandparents had learned from their parents or grandparents and so on. And seeing that was alive, it's not that their turkey in the straw is better than a turkey in the straw from North Carolina is significantly different from one from a Métis fiddle player or something like that. It's a little act of freedom that lives between the ears. It's something that has never been very well. It hasn't been commercially viable for over 100 years, and we hung on to it because it was something that we could choose to hold on to, right? And in a world where I don't have a choice about whether or not I know that the McRib is back, right? There's so many things I don't have freedom over. I don't get to choose whether or not I use the right lane or the left lane, right? I think that there's certain kinds of freedoms that we can win back from late capitalisms, like apocalyptic plastic end run. And I think for me, music is the paradigm where I discovered that, because I grew up the same way as every kid in America, or almost all kids, right? In the suburbs, feeling disconnected. And there were parts of my family that we didn't talk to because they were low class or not nice or something. And I felt pretty alienated from where I came from and who I was. And I think that one of the birthrights of being born into a liberal democracy should be asking the question, who am I? Not as a sellable product, but as a timeline of hardworking human beings.
What were you doing? Now you have this outlet where you make this beautiful music, and you have this communal, almost church-like experience that I just got to take in and be a part of. When you're that alienated kid growing up in the suburbs, what did you have, if anything?
I mean, a lot of times it was nothing, right? Yeah. I think a lot of people could agree that a lot of times there just is nothing. You don't get lucky. Yeah. I was saved from the alt-right by poets and poetry, and by being queer. Poetry the books always lived in the bathroom. They were between the comic books, right? Yeah. You just slide a slim volume of poetry or something. And it was strictly stealing from the Borders or the Barnes & Noble or something. It was, or $4 best loved American poems, paperbacks. It was emotional territory I hadn't gotten to live much that I really craved. So I wanted to be a poet.
Was somebody turning you on to that? Was that just what's your gateway to all of that?
I would say it's my father. He, there's some people have interesting or fun bedtime stories. My dad was always, here's this Robert Frost poem, or here's this something. There was this thing called the Book of Virtues, and it was just ugh. Everything was just like Aesop's fables, be a good boy, be this, be that, or so on. But sometimes it was the poems were fun because they had rhythm. He could recite Jabberwocky, that crazy Lewis Carroll nonsense poem. Yeah. And those were times I got to see otherwise pretty, I guess, fairly serious family be silly. Was when we were singing or dancing or reciting.
Okay, so was your dad musical as well? Was there music in the house and that kind of thing?
There was. He didn't play any music by that point, but he played bluegrass in a bluegrass band and also in a cover band. He originally played tuba in a polka band in Lederhosen around Wichita, Kansas, where I grew up. And that was when he was 16 or 17.
So at what point did you, it seems like early on, you knew that you were a creative person, right? And you kind of talked a little bit about it there. At what point did you sort of come to that realization that, hey, I'm someone who needs to make stuff?
That's a good question. Pretty much as soon as it was available, I guess. It was good teachers that made it available to me. I was not a good student. And
that's interesting.
Except in things where you got to make it yourself. You got to do whatever you wanted. And I remember there were writing assignments where I would just buck the prompt entirely and do whatever I wanted and take the C with pride. I remember some specifics. If the prompt felt like it was taking me in too bad of a direction, public schools weren't very good, and I got in too many fights to kind of get into any of the like, I guess fancier schools. I don't think that there was money there either. Yeah, I was. If you looked at me wrong, I would punch you. But I was, for the most part, would keep to myself.
That's really interesting because I mean I don't know you well, but you're not a small person, and you're a very likable person from what I've experienced of you. So you getting in fights is a very interesting thing. Like, what was causing that reaction?
I think it was like a perpetual. I mean, I think anybody with like raised in a male environment will know that sort of base humiliation that comes from being looked at funny.
Yeah.
That comes from somebody thinking that you are less than them, or that deeply ingrained feeling that you might be less than unless you prove yourself, right? And so anytime anybody said anything, it was like, well, we will settle this right now.
Yeah.
And the result is that creativity can lead people to liking themselves, and I think that if people are comfortable with who they are and what they want, then they can find outlets for that kind of anger that are effective. And I want people to know the reason I like to talk about this stuff, because I really was very angry, and I was a pretty misogynistic little kid. In fact, I read like a philosophy paper from my first year in college, and I was a little fascist, honestly.
Yeah.
I really was.
Yeah.
People were very patient with me.
Well, I'd like to unpack that if you're
Sure,
comfortable doing
yeah.
so, because I can relate, right? So, I mean, I grew up in a very conservative environment, and now I will say I was really lucky that when I got to college, and I'm not sure if I've talked about this on the show, but here we go. I don't know why I looked at my recorder as if it was going to give me answers, but I was in a fraternity in college that was founded by Confederate soldiers who really revered, almost worshipped Robert E. Lee. And I now look at it, and a lot of the rituals and things like that were straight up fascist. Not just like conservative, but like straight up Nazi shit, right? And ironically, I had a roommate who was one of the most open-minded people I've ever met in my life, and had like studied Ayurvedic medicine in Tibet, and was like this person who we would sit up late at night and listen to Tool and talk about the lyrics, and
That's
like
awesome.
yeah, it was great. And he turned me on to all this music, and like we'd be all drunk and drinking whiskey at 4 a.m. listening to Maynard and trying to make sense of the world through his lyrics, and for the moment at least we did. But I think I was fortunate to have that experience, because that helped me to not go. You mentioned that, like, getting saved from the alt-right. Like, I just released an episode of the show that I call Marinade Moments, where I talked about a band that I loved in my 20s that I didn't see as being conservative or having those kinds of even like further right-leaning ideals. And maybe they don't, but their fans sure do. And if I hadn't had people like Mike, my roommate, I shudder to think like what direction I would have been. So like, can you talk about where you veered away from what could have been a really nasty path?
Oh, sure. The incongruencies were already there, right? But I remember the first like really challenging stuff that I read was Nietzsche, and I really enjoyed The Twilight of the Idols and The Antichrist, because it was like nonsense. It was like continentalist philosophies, generalized rejection of logic and positivism and stuff is really appealing when you don't live in a world yourself that makes any sense, right? To you, when you believe that it's not fair, right? And that's all a little heady, but suffice to say, if you don't feel good about yourself, somebody that preaches a doctrine of like total individuality and the possibility of like ascendant individuality, being so much your own ding-dang self, that you rise above the mire of the rest of humanity that has been quibbling over a piece of cheese like rats in a cage. It's really appealing. So I guess that's the ideological version, right? But the version of me listening to Tool was actually just friends that did not care that I was queer, and friends that, and specifically female friends, that asked why I was so angry about, like, I was just angry at women, angry at sex, angry about, and I couldn't explain it. And I remember this wonderful gal gave me some second wave feminism, some Andrea Dworkin, and that was just aggressive enough to like be in direct combat. I had to have stuff that was intense, right? Because it wasn't gonna be something that was like, hey, it's okay, you need to take a deep breath. That was just gonna make me,
of course,
angry. Right?
Yeah, it's gonna piss you off.
Tell somebody to calm down. It's like that's only gonna make it worse.
I just saw that play out on the streets of Asheville last night.
Really?
I did. I just saw that exact thing. This older dude tried to calm this younger dude down, and the younger dude getting angrier and angrier as he was being told to calm down.
Yeah. And well, so one of the things that I think we lose track of maybe in that is that like anger is like another one of those good emotions. It can be really productive, and that energy, if used for decent things, is like incredible. And I'm trying to love being angry again because I stifled it down. I changed the track of it for a long time, and I don't want to get too heady with it. It's already way too heady. I'm talking about Nietzsche and Andrea Dworkin, but suffice to say then that other ways of like acting saved me from that. So from being a really angry person, ways that were really expressive, and it was singing with people. We used to sing the Pete Seeger songbook cover to cover. I had Utah Phillips' Starlight on the Rails songbook, really great anarchist folk singer. And then I was living in this town, Galesburg, Illinois, where the poet Carl Sandburg had like grown up, and he sang folk songs really badly, and I really liked how badly he sang them. But also he was just writing poems about charming little Americana poems that were set in the place that I was from, and nobody had ever treated the place that I was from, the prairies, like they were important. In any reading I'd ever done ever, nobody thought it was cool to be from Kansas and Illinois. Nobody ever. It still is so rare, Yeah, it still is very rare.
Yeah. Well, I feel like some of that is coming through in the revolution that you spoke of on stage today. I think there are a lot of folks maybe that are from that. I think My Politic came to mind first, off the bat. And there are others that probably aren't coming to mind right now, but that are able to, because I think, so there's a danger in over romanticizing some of those places that have tons and tons of their own problems.
Yeah.
And I think this is something I've been wrestling with lately too, is sort of that spirit of, I want to recognize the place I'm from. I want to be respectful to it. I want to acknowledge the ways in which specifically consumerism and American society have oppressed it and have led it down really nasty roads, but also that part of me that grew up believing in personal responsibility, that sort of conservative thing we talked about earlier, wrestling with my sense of how do I talk about this place by being respect, because I think that what tends to happen a lot of times is folks who have a more sort of liberal mindset will often just blame it on consumerism. And I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know that I'm right or wrong about that. I'm just saying it's a very difficult thing for me to process as someone who sees that and sees family members of mine who express their frustrations in very hateful ways toward people of color, toward queer people, toward women. and how you wrestle with that. And I'm wondering, like, what you think about that and like sort of your headspace, especially as you're making things and thinking about writing about those kinds of things.
If I'm totally honest right now, I spend a lot of time being an apologist for people from rural places. And in fact, a phrase I'm sure I've said on a podcast before is, you really want to be mad at people for being denied social and civic services for 100 years.
Right.
Like, good luck. Because that's really going to get you somewhere. And I have some venom in my blood for sometimes the way people talk to me on the coasts about that kind of thing. It's like they just can't believe you would ever like a place like that or something. And
right.
And then I have about 1,000 excellent anecdotes where I remember I told somebody I was dating his daughter, and he was nothing but kind to me for years. And I was nothing but a leech, honestly. I think, just eating dinner and sleeping in a feather bed at his house. And he just wanted me to get married to her. And after some convincing, I was like, this is awfully patriarchal. And he said, am I not a patriarch? And it was like, okay, so this is a method of social organization that has given a meaningfulness to your life that a lot of people are missing. And I want to see the good parts of that. Those are people that are in control. In some cases, people are more able to be more in control of their foodways and more in control of their... when communities have to take care of each other, right, there's some advantage, right? We talk about mutual aid in cities, but it also exists out in the country where it's just a church. In terms of finding balance, right, the thing that scares me the most is actually the suburban bigot. It's not the rural one. Is the one who could be fully informed but won't be.
Yes.
The one who's abandoned the church and both the church and the meeting hall, or the who has been fully isolated by consumerism into a place where they're angry, manipulatable, and haven't seen enough of the world to meet it on its own terms. So I think it's such a difficult question. To me, the show is the place where I'm trying to do that work, where if I can just get people to sing together. If I could have everybody go to a square dance, I would. And I would like for that to be in my shows eventually.
That's fun.
It's a big risk to ask a bunch of people to hold hands.
And
do things together. But I want to make everybody feel a little foolish and a little silly and try to get along a little bit. And so, I guess that's my answer. Is I'm trying at the shows.
That's an incredible answer. You mentioned the square dance a couple times today, and auctioneers. My father was an auctioneer off and on for much of his life. Yeah, so I would go, and there was sort of like a magic to it. There's like the energy.
Yeah.
And you bring quite a bit of that energy to your shows. What is it about that environment or that work that speaks to you so much?
There's like a Werner Herzog documentary about cattle auctions, and I love it because he's like, the profiteering methods of late-stage capitalism are fully at work here, and and he's pointing at a joyful guy in a cowboy hat jumping up and down holding a Diet Coke, just trying to buy another cow, right? Like, so essentially, I call BS. I think that's people buying and selling on their own terms, right? And at least that's most of the auctions that I've seen. I also just think that putting that activity inside of a human makes sense, right? If you interface with a human instead of an algorithm, we're at this point, right, where if you're interfacing with a human instead of an algorithm, boy, you're lucky, right? And those are economies of scale that can make sense, right? Something I'm uncomfortable with about playing music and getting popular at all is that I can't remember everybody anymore, and I used to. Honestly, I used to be able to hug and shake every hand and hug every single person, and I probably made you wait for probably half an hour just hugging and talking to people out there.
Yeah.
But it's the part that's scary is it grows beyond the scale of your comprehension. How many businesses have done this over a period of time, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
I think that I believe part of an anarchist fundamental, right, is like keeping things at a scale that is comprehensive, that is human, that takes as much humanness into account as possible. And I would never want to be in a club that would have me as a member. But I really like that credo. And to me, that's what an auctioneer or a square dance caller is saying, this is our community. Here's how we do it. I am the numbers cruncher. Listen to me crunch.
Yeah. How are you, I'm interested to dive a little bit deeper into that. Like, your crowds keep growing. You keep getting more and more glowing reviews of your recorded work and your live shows. You were all over my algorithm when you played in Newport. And so I'm interested in, like, at this stage right now, right? Like, it could very easily, very, very easily exponentially grow
Sure.
any minute now,
Yeah.
right? How are you processing that in terms of, like, maintaining that connection that is such a essential part of what you do?
I'm not really sure yet. Yeah, and I'm unsatisfied with that answer too. But we've been holding on. One thing I know I want to do is, as we expand, that everybody, I've actually found that I kind of need training in first response and things like suicide prevention and stuff, and being able to have hard conversations with people right away while also kind of detaching a little bit has been something I've really been trying to learn, so that I can be a good, not trying to bring up emotions in people and then leave them in the dust.
Yeah.
That said, it's becoming impossible for me to take care of every emotion that was had, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to be there for those that I can. So that's something that I've done, but that's like a tiny Band-Aid if it scales up. And so my answer is one-on-one. What would I do? What do I do?
Yeah.
And so 100 to 1, right? What I hope is there's a lot of people working in the music industry that don't do much work.
Mm-hmm.
A lighting designer oftentimes shows up quite late to a sound check, right? And then just expects to just flip some lights. Well, I love showbiz. I got notes for you, man. I want you. And same thing with security. I know that you want to just stand there. It's okay. But if you're here to keep everybody safe, well, then then maybe if you're on payroll, then we can try something where everybody takes a risk together, like holding hands or something, and doing a small dance together. Maybe there can be something positive in the kind of group hypnosis that happens at a music concert that can be effectively politicized in ways that aren't specific or didactic, but that are really about equity and togetherness, which I don't think is, that to me hopefully would be the bottom of our political dialogue, but it just is, we're so far from that. And,
Yeah.
So those are some dreams, I guess, is using parts of the music industry. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to be a sleeper agent, right? As I'll play larger festivals that have a lot of venture capital attached to them that I'm not comfortable with, and I'll be there pushing underappreciated vernaculars. I'll be pushing understanding of people that are different than you, but not, and I'll just be saying that as a tall white guy, right? I don't have to say it, and I'm not there because I should appear to be saying it, right? Which I think that can be the case in kind of a typecasting, and so I feel like I'm trying to bring something that is different and hopefully affect small changes from the very, very bottom, because we're talking poetry. W.B. Yeats, I'll lie down where all the ladders start in the foul ray and boneyard of the heart.
That was maybe the best answer that's ever been given on the Marinade with Jason Earle podcast. Thank you for that. In diving into your work, one of the things I came across was this piece that really inspired me in No Depression, where I guess it was written about the time of your last record. And it starts out with like this sort of poetic, idyllic description of your life in the Ozarks, like your relationship and like all of this. And then it just out of nowhere blindsides you with some turns. I'm interested in, and it was incredible because it's like the way I want to write. When I read that, I told River Shook and Blake Talent, River's guitar player, last night about this because it's just been on my mind that like that piece was so powerful. And you said a lot in a very short amount of time, which is what you do so well with your songs too. What is like your creative work itself when you're going to write something like that, for example, which is a deeply personal thing that isn't in the form of a song or a poem? Like, is there a different headspace you need to be in to access something like that?
First of all, thanks for reading that. I'm really proud of that piece, and I wish I wrote more stuff like that. I wish I had felt like I had time.
Yeah.
And I really want to do a book of essays. Usually, honestly, I kind of start with like in the same mode as songs. I'm usually try to start with blistering honesty. What is it that I want to say the least, but most want people to know? And then also, can I come up with some scenes that convincingly put people in place? And I don't need those scenes to be connected. I'm not a great believer in narrative that goes from one event to the next, right? I can't even, I wish I could talk that way. I can't. I'm sort of a web person, not a ladder person, if that makes sense. And
Sure.
Constellations that you just kind of move between. And so, yeah, I usually am trying to start with what the hardest thing to say is. And in that essay, I knew that it was like missing a dog that I lost in a breakup and also died, and so I usually am just if I'm being totally honest, I'm just trying to find a through line. And I try to make it a through line that's vulnerable and can make me be honest, because I think I don't mind being glib, and I don't mind being slick. I don't mind showbiz, and I'm not obsessed with the exact truth either. And what creative person is, right? I'm very well acquainted with how bad my memory is, right? We have to be if you're going to make things.
Yeah.
And it's been proven to, like, scientifically. So.
Yeah. Oh my God! Everything, so much you're saying resonates with me. The series I alluded to earlier, this Marinade Moments thing I'm doing, where I'm talking about shows that I've attended over the years. Some of these shows are 20, 24 years ago. You know,
yeah.
like
How do you
I've lived
remember?
lifetimes. Like, how do you remember? And is the actual story as compelling as whatever is in my head right now? Whatever I remember about that, whatever I've projected with all of the life events that have transpired since then, is the actual story as interesting as this? Right now it's not, because right now is the only reality that I have. And I'm telling the story of something that happened 20 years ago, but I have to look at it through this lens.
Right.
You know?
Even folk songs aren't accurate or materially or consistent, or folk songs are really bad ways for stories to catapult out of control. I was interviewing some people in Arkansas about some Badman ballads that were written about an outlaw from the 60s. And these Badman ballads were being written in the style of like the Jesse James or Cole Younger outlaw ballads. And eventually I found the family, and it just turned out that the guy was an absolute like a monster to his family. Like he was a pederast and a mean guy, and that the family had been like part of like crushing poverty for a long time, but some outlaw misdeeds like got in the brains of a few folk singers, and then they proceeded to do what they do, which is spin yarns. And that's why actually one of the reasons to be a folk singer, though, is not because it's unreliable, or not because you want it to be reliable, because you know it is unreliable. Because you then see that history is this like great big flux of people like suffering and working and trying their best, and that feels like a more forgiving space than it was this way, and so it shall remain. Women are women and men are men, and we know how the Civil War, exactly what the Civil War was fought over and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that nuance has to come through. I mean, I think that's such a big part of why we make stuff, is to get to that nuance and to project all of the bits of it, right? The nastiness and the good, and the good and the not so good, onto those kinds of things. I'm interested in where you're going now. So you got a new record coming up at the beginning of next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What has that process been like, and what can we expect? How much can you tell us about it?
The record's called Critterland, and there's a lot about deaths of despair on it. Lost a couple of friends to fentanyl in the last couple of years, and there hasn't been a lot of space to write intense and dramatic songs. And there hasn't been a lot of space for like capital R romance in my writing. And so I'd say that's the direction we're headed in. It's probably not the most commercially viable direction we could have picked, but...
Well, then you don't have to worry about that connecting with people one-on-one anymore, right? If you're not going...
Right.
It's a self-sabotage.
Alienate everyone.
I'm just kidding.
In fact, I worry it might be... Well, it's not... I've worried that it's too intense. But I think that's just because it's white hot to me, and that is a good. If I've learned anything from things like that, no depression essay, is that that's a good feeling.
Yeah,
it becomes good eventually, right? But so I'm in that nervous phase of, so there's also like there's a long form story that closes it out. That's like a true story of some pot dealers in the part of Northwest Arkansas that I'm from. That was like a lot of research and interviews and rumors and stuff. So it rounds itself out kind of with a long folk ballad, long folk badman ballad, actually. That's my own dramatization of a regional folk tale.
Man, okay, so that's really interesting. Then, how do you what does the sort of the bits of your scheduling, like your day? It sounds like you feel like part music historian, part songwriter and performer. You're clearly reading quite a bit. You're doing all this research as well, especially as we're talking about this new record. Like, how are you an organized person? Like, how do you in certain terms of a sort of more, I don't know, a more like, oh, all good, man. Sort of a more like practical way. What does your creative process look like?
It's pure chaos, actually.
Okay.
No, it's actually really bad adult ADHD that was diagnosed like a year and a half ago.
Oh, wow, okay.
Inability to hold down a conventional job, like absolute messy desk syndrome that leads to piles of notes. The way that I organize my notes is by season and not with anything in mind. It's grocery list, blends freely into working on a song, blends freely into chord progression. If there was some sort of super notebook, I want this so badly, that could combine sounds with transcription, with written notes with digital notes and have that happen in real time as you were working on it, that would be the best thing. But as it is, and we're just sort of trying to capture all that shit at once.
Yeah.
And yeah, I read really widely. I intentionally lack discipline about what I'm reading. I'm also like not a great folklorist. I don't have a lot of training. I just talk to people. And musically, I'm interested. In fact, one of the reasons I love folk music is that you can have some discipline, right? Is that you can find a style. It's fun to play in a style. And I guess the same thing with like certain kinds of page poetry or something, right? Is that you pick a style. You read in a discipline. You write, you write a sonnet. Yeah. And so really we're just finding containers for total chaos.
It feels like they're trying to get rid of us, and that's actually a perfect segue into what we end on, which is the art that has you fired up at the moment. So what are you reading or listening to, or in that chaos, what are you excited about right now, art-wise?
It's been a long time since I'd read Leaves of Grass, and I'm rereading Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I also am revisiting Rilke's Duino Elegies, which been a long time since I'd read those. I've been reading a book, I think it's called 1163 or something. It's about the fall of the Bronze Age. And I've been interested in that stuff for a long time. And I'm also reading a book by James Gaddis called On Grand Strategy, which is essentially just a Yale military historian trying to boil down some essential facts about how to strategize well by using hundreds of historical examples. Yeah, I tend to be reading several things at once. I just finished Gore Vidal's The City and the Pillar, kind of a gay Bildungsroman, and did not enjoy it.
Why?
I'm a sucker for really nice prose, and that's not nice, very nice prose.
Okay, all right.
I like lush language.
Yeah.
I'm listening to, oh boy, I guess I'm listening to sort of. There's a lot of back listening. I'm really interested in concertina music right now, and accordion music. So I've been listening to, I guess, a lot of polkas and jigs and reels, and also like a lot of my contemporaries. Like I tried to listen to everybody that was playing at Newport Folk Festival, and that'll keep me busy for a year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was an incredible lineup. You made me think of my friend Stephen Rock. Is a big Whitman fan, and he writes what he calls like post-folk, I think he refers to his music, his own music as. But yeah, little plug for Steven, folks listening, and for you. I absolutely love him. His music doesn't sound like anything else, and he's one of those guys that, and I'm going to call you out right now, buddy. Calling Steven out right now. He's one of those guys that doesn't have a record. I keep looking at my recorder as if it's like going to give me answers to some of these things or going to respond to me, but he's one of those guys that doesn't have a record out, but you can find things on SoundCloud and Spotify and stuff from him, and I just am such a fan of what he does. But he's very inspired by Whitman. I think you'll hear that when you listen to the music. Man, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for that incredible set.
Sure.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks
I'm
for
just
putting up
really,
with me.
really grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dirty, 'cause the heart's a big tent. Gotta let everybody in. Doesn't matter who they are, if they do right or where they've been. Everybody gets it.
Willi Carlisle, y'all. Thank you so much, Willi. Thank all of you for listening. WilliCarlisle.com for all things Willi Carlisle. The song you're hearing in this episode is Your Heart's a Big Tent from Willi's most recent album, Peculiar Missouri. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, Spoutable, Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon. We're on all the things except Facebook. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support the Marinade. Go do that right now while you're listening, please. It makes a big difference for us and costs so little of your time and effort. If you really like what we're doing and swing it financially, please consider joining our Patreon community for just $2 a month, y'all. You can gain access to Patreon exclusive content like our show Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making the Marinade. Y'all, you can now try a free trial of Patreon to see if you like it. No pressure. Try it for 7 days. Set a reminder on your phone in case you want to cancel, and keep going if you dig it. We also have a monthly show over there called What We're Getting Down On. It's a conversation between me and my good friend Peter Haraldson. We have a lot of fun catching up once a month. There's just a lot of cool stuff over there, and it's a way to connect with the show. If you want to support us financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I totally get that. You can Venmo or PayPal us. Just search for the Marinade. All the money goes right back into the making of the show. There is no conversation with River Shook from episode 140 or this one without our Patreon patrons. Sure, we could have done things on Zoom, and that would have been great, but special moments like this happen because of our Patreon patrons, and it was just great to sit around and wait for Willi and see him interact with people and then have a chance to talk about that. And there's an intimacy to recording the Marinade in person the way I always intended. And so I'm just really thankful that folks support the show and help us to get to these festivals and these shows around the country. Above all, though, I'm just so thankful that you listen and spread the word about the Marinade. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.